Right, according to me, it's exactly, it's a minute past. Right, welcome to the class. So this will be the last section before the assignment. So it should be chapter 8 at the moment. Okay, so chapter 7 and 8 is learning unit 6, so it's combined together. I'm just going to admit everyone. Okay. So it is quite a short section, but it kind of closes off the theory of demand. So just to quickly recap on what we have already discussed. So in terms of your indifference curve, meaning we have multiple indifference curves, and our idea behind having these multiple indifference curves is that as you're consuming goods, okay, you have this notion that the more goods you consume, okay, you're going to receive some form of satisfaction from the consumption of these goods. Otherwise, as consumers, we'd have no reason to do that. Okay, so we have these indifference curves, which basically means we want to maximize our level of satisfaction that we're going to gain from the consumption of these goods. Okay, so we have an indifference curve, and then we'll state the law of substitution or the law of the marginal rate of substitution. And what's nice about economics is if you actually break the concept down, it explains what it actually means. So it's not like this foreign concept you need to think of and try and study, and it actually makes sense. Okay. So just a brief recap again. We looked at utility. So basically, utility is our ability to actually put a number, an absolute value to our level of satisfaction. So for example's sake, I said to you, if we have that first cup of coffee in the morning and I had to ask you, how much satisfaction would you derive if I had to say, from that first cup of coffee, that first sip of coffee, what would your level of satisfaction be out of 10? And majority people, if you are a coffee drinker, will say 10. Okay. But now, if 2 hours later you have another cup of coffee, then what happens? It won't be a level 10. It will probably be a level 8. It's never going to give you that same level of satisfaction the way the first cup has given you. Okay. So that's the concept of utility. And then they break it down into two main components, being cardinal utility and ordinal utility. And then ordinal, easiest way to remember, ordinal means order. So can you rank them in order of preference, i.e., when you go to when you go grocery shopping, okay, and you have this long list of things that you have to purchase, as we all do, are you able to rank them in order of preference? Meaning, do you prefer, for example's sake, okay, some of us, not all of us, like vegetables and fruits and those kind of things. We'll run for the burgers and the junk food, basically. We'll run for junk food. So in order of preference, my junk food will be higher because I derive a greater level of satisfaction from those products, even though we are all adults and we all need to consume fruits and vegetables because we want to be healthy human beings. So that will be on our list, but it's going to be a little bit lower, if not in the middle of our list. So that's what we're saying. Are you able to rank these different bundles of products that you are buying in order of your preference? Okay. And then cardinal utility. Cardinal utility is the literal concept of putting a number to your level of satisfaction. So an absolute value is any number greater than 0. So can you, well, in most cases, it can be negative as well, but any value to the level of satisfaction that you're gaining from the consumption of these goods. Okay. So then we started off and we said indifference. So this is just a quick recap, just to say that your indifference curve is then a combination of two products, because as consumers, we're constantly making choices between two different products, our consumption of two different products, in understanding that if you are on the same indifference curve, you will have the same level of satisfaction. You have maximized your level of satisfaction. So you are satisfied regardless of where on that curve you are. Okay. Yes. And then we have three basic assumptions when it comes to the indifference curve. The one being completeness, the other one being consistency or transparency, and the third one being non-satiation. Okay, so the one of completeness, what we're trying to say there is, can you rank them? That's as simple as that. Do you have all of the information possible for you to rank them in order of preference? When it comes to consistency and transparency, there we're saying consumers tend to act very rationally. We make very rational choices, and we will make the same choices if the same options are presented to us, i.e., every month you are purchasing the same goods over and over and over. You're deriving some level of satisfaction from the consumption of these goods every month. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't buy it, essentially. You'd be wasting your money. Okay, so every month you are constantly buying the same goods. You are consistent. Okay. And the last one, non-satiation, that's very simple. Easiest way, more is preferred to less. As consumers, we always want more. We always want to consume more. We want more money, logically. Okay, we all want more money. Therefore, if we have more, we will spend more. So if we have more income, we will then demand more goods and services. We will then ultimately spend more. Okay, so more is always preferred to less. And those are the three assumptions when it comes to your indifference curve. Okay, so then just a quick recap again. This is the one curve where it's very small, but the one curve where it's now not to do with the price. So you can see in terms of your axis, it's the quantity that you are going to demand of good A and the quantity that you're going to demand of good B. So just remember in terms of your assignment that you don't lose marks unnecessarily, because if I remember correctly, that's where a lot of you missed your marks when it came to the PPC, where you listed the products in the correct order, meaning the correct axis, but you didn't actually indicate that it's the quantity of product A and the quantity of product B. You just listed the products. Okay, so you lose marks if you don't label the curves correctly. So regardless of where on this curve we are, whether we are at the highest point or we're at the lowest point on this curve, we have maximized our level of satisfaction. Okay, so we want to be somewhere on the curve. That's the idea. Okay, so whether you are, regardless of how high you have maximized your level of satisfaction, and that gives us your indifference curve for the two products. Okay. So then we have, as consumers, you have multiple indifference curves. Okay. In understanding that the higher the indifference curve is, the higher your level of satisfaction has become. So we are constantly chasing, remember, more is preferred to less. We are constantly chasing this high level of satisfaction that we presume we would derive should we consume more and more and more of a product. Okay. So the reality is, what would stop you from going from utility curve 1 or indifference curve 1, U1, to U3? What would be the only option? Because in understanding that you're still talking about the law of demand. And the law of demand still states that a consumer must be willing and able. So us being willing, right, is the concept of indifference curve. We are thinking, we expect to derive a certain level of satisfaction. That is us being willing to consume these goods. Able, the able part of it is then where our budget comes in. So we must be willing and able. So indifference curve comes from the concept of you must be willing. And then the able part comes from the concept of you must have a budget line. Okay, and we'll get to the budget line now. Right. So then we have the law of substitution or the law of diminishing marginal utility. So I also said the word marginal going forward in the next couple of chapters as well. The word marginal means additional. So the additional level of satisfaction that you are going to derive as a consumer for consuming one more unit of the product. So the more you consuming of the product, one additional unit of that product, you are then going to, essentially your level of satisfaction will decrease the more you consume. So if we think back to our coffee example, that first cup of coffee going to give you a very high level of satisfaction. The second cup of coffee won't give you that same high level of satisfaction as the first cup gave you. So if you had the first cup in the morning, 2 hours later, you got to the office, you had another cup of coffee. 3 hours later, after a couple of meetings, you had another cup of coffee and then maybe lunch. And then just before you go home, you have your fourth cup. What's going to happen to your level of satisfaction in terms of the consumption of your cups of coffee? Because some of us are addicted to coffee, but what will happen to your level of satisfaction throughout the day as you're consuming one more, that's the marginal part, one more cup of coffee every 2-3 hours? So it will get less. The level of satisfaction you're going to derive is going to be less and less and less until you eventually stop drinking coffee for the day. Okay. So the higher up you are in your indifference curve, you're deriving the highest level of satisfaction. You are also willing to give up more because you have more to give up. Okay. So if we're looking at the example here where we're saying it's the quantity of bread and it's the quantity of meat. So you'll see when you are higher on your indifference curve, they're saying the quantity of bread is six units of bread, loaves of bread, let's say, for example's sake. As you're moving down on your indifference curve, they gave up. This consumer had to give up to move from point A to point B. They had to give up 3 loaves of bread to gain one more unit of meat. But then if they move from B to C, they only gave up 1 unit to give up to, they gave up 1 unit of bread to gain one more unit of meat. And then from C to D, you're going to give up, sacrifice 1 unit, or should have labeled it properly, but it's 0.5 units that you are giving up of bread in order to gain one more. So when you have a lot more, you are willing to sacrifice more to gain one more unit. For example's sake, when you go to a store, right, and we all have our budgets every month, and you initially budgeted on, for example's sake, 6 loaves of bread. That was initially part of your budget. Now, when you got to the store, they said, okay, okay, 6 is a bit excessive, but let's say 2 loaves of bread was or 1 loaf of bread was originally part of your budget, right? So you budgeted on 1 loaf of bread, but now in the store, they say to you, okay, you realistically, if you buy another loaf of bread, you can pay 50% off, or if it's buy 3 and get 2. So, but yeah, buy 3 and then you only pay for 2. So you're going to get 1 for free. Initially, part of your budget was only to buy 1. Now you're thinking, okay, if I buy another one, I'll get the third one for free. Now, normal consumers, okay, if we are in the middle income margin, remember our budget doesn't change, our income doesn't change. So we then have to make alternative choices consistently. So if I then say, okay, I'm going to take this 3 loaves of bread, and understanding that I'm paying for 1 additional loaf of bread, okay? I then have to sacrifice something within my budget. And then in most cases, most of us are like, oh, it's fine. I'll be okay. It's fine. I can take the extra loaf of bread. But if you're talking to somebody that's in the lower income market, and they are also looking at it from a special perspective where they're like, okay, now we can have 3 loaves of bread. I can pay for 2 because I'm going to have to buy the bread down the line anyway. But right now, because my budget is so strapped, I'm not willing to sacrifice, because by them saying sacrifice, they essentially saying, I'm going to have to remove something off my grocery list because I won't afford it. But the middle income and higher income market, if we look at it and we say, okay, it's on special, I'll take both, it's fine, I'll be okay. Okay, so the more you have, the easier it is for you to sacrifice to make these choices. But the less you have, the more difficult it becomes. Where in understanding that if you're sacrificing, you're actually removing something off your list because you don't have a lot to give up. Okay. So that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. The more you have, the more you're willing to sacrifice and make the choices to gain one more unit of a product. But the less you have, the less you essentially have to sacrifice at the end of the day just to still gain that one additional unit of the product. Okay. And then just in understanding that also, anywhere on that indifference curve, you have the exact same slope. So not the exact same slope, but your slope would essentially be similar because at every point there is a straight line that's tangent to that point. Okay, and I'll show you what that looks like. Literally just explained everything. Here we go. Okay, so your indifference curve is essentially made up of a combination of straight lines. And we all know that in a straight line, it's y is equals to mx plus c. And that essentially gives us our marginal rate of substitution. You just have to understand that it's made up like this. Okay, we didn't just magically think of it. You don't need to draw it. You just need to draw the normal utility curve. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the multiple straight lines. And then the formula, right. So here we are now. There are properties. Okay, so there are assumptions first, and we have the 3 assumptions. And then we have properties of the indifference curve. So we're saying 1, it's always downward sloping. Okay, same as a demand curve, it's always downward sloping. It's bowed inward, meaning it's convex. Okay, the shape, we're saying now the shape of the curve. The higher your indifference curve, we prefer a higher indifference curve to a lower indifference curve. And I said to you, we keep trying to maximize our level of satisfaction, thus moving to higher and higher and higher indifference curves. And the other thing is that the indifference curves themselves do not intercept. They don't cross each other ever. Okay. So in the slides, you'll see there, it's almost convex in shape and it's downward sloping. The more you have, the more you're willing to sacrifice. The less you have, the less you're willing to sacrifice. It's downward sloping. It's made up of, where are we now? Okay, it's made up of these straight lines that made up these intercept points. Hence, we got to our indifferent shape. Okay, and it's convex in origin, meaning it's not concave like your PPC is. We have multiple indifference curves because we have multiple levels of satisfaction when it comes to consumption of products, and more is preferred to less. So we want to get to a higher and higher and higher indifference curve. And then the last one being that they don't intercept. So these two curves, these two indifference curves will never cross each other. They get closer and closer and closer together, but they never cross each other. Okay. And then there's a video that you can obviously watch in your own time. So then the second part of it, we're then saying the ultimate idea here is that you want to be in consumer equilibrium. So just remember also, equilibrium on its own as a concept is derived by saying its quantity demanded is equals to your quantity supplied. Then you are in equilibrium. If you just say now that you are in equilibrium, we're referring to demand and supply in action. We're referring to demand and supply. So that would be learning unit 4. That's what we are referring to. But when we say you are in consumer equilibrium, we are talking about learning unit 6. Okay, because in understanding that the theory of demand is based on consumers, it's based on demand. So at what point are consumers in equilibrium when it comes to maximizing our level of satisfaction? And then we derive our budget lines. Okay, so we've discussed all of these outcomes. We said the higher indifference curve, that's always preferred to the less. And then we get to now this concept of your budget line. So we must be part of the theory of demand. You must be willing and able. Okay. So now the budget line now comes in. So we're saying consumers make decisions based on our level of satisfaction we are going to obtain from consumption of these goods and what we can ultimately afford. Okay. That kind of stops and deters us and almost guides our choices, is our budget line, is our budget constraints. We all, unfortunately, we don't have we don't have an unlimited income. Okay. So if we're looking at the example, obviously the amounts are very much, very much not realistic. But if your budget is, for example, say 24 Rand and you're still looking at bread and meat, and when you get to the store, you see that bread is 4 Rand, meat is 6 Rand. Okay. Your budget is 24 Rand. One of the assumptions that you always make in economics is that you must spend, or consumers must spend all of their income. So when we get to deriving, how do we construct your budget line with these values? Okay. Getting your axis, just make sure. So number one, we're saying it's our quantity demanded of bread, quantity demanded of meat. Okay. Now we want to get our intercept points. So the way we do that is we take our total budget and we divide it by the individual prices of each product. So it's your total budget divided by the price of bread, and then your total budget divided by the price of meat. And then we will get our intercept points. So if we do that, it's 24 total budget divided by 4 Rand, the price of bread, and that gives us an intercept point of 6, meaning if I utilize my entire income on just bread, I will be able to purchase 6 loaves of bread. Versus meat, 24 divided by 6, I will be able to purchase 4 units. You draw a straight line, you label your curve, budget line, okay? And that essentially is how we derive a budget line. So it's very simple, okay? We will then look at now the slope of the budget line. And here we just need you to understand the concept. It seldomly gets tested. It's just one of those things we need you to understand. Because it's a straight line, the slope of your curve, okay? Where we look at the formulas, should be 1.5, I think. Yeah, one and a half, negative 1.5. The reason why your slope is negative is because demand tends to have a negative slope. The demand curve always has a negative slope. Okay, so we're saying it's our change in our x-axis, a change in your y-axis, sorry, divided by a change. So the triangle means change, meaning the difference in our y-axis divided by the difference in our x-axis, or the difference in our quantity of bread divided by the difference in our quantity of meat. And the reason why, because we would have started at 0. So the difference is the new. So we're saying it's 0 minus 6, hence it's got a negative sign. Okay, makes sense to everyone. So just to show you that this is how we derive the slope of your budget line. You don't need to worry about the physical calculations of the slope. Okay. So then the main thing we want to get to here is how do we then derive consumer equilibrium from that? So now we have our budget line. There's our budget line. Okay. In understanding, we have multiple utility curves. Okay. There will always be a utility curve to match your budget line. So you are maximizing your level of satisfaction based on your budget. So you do not need to draw the multiple utility curves. We are aware that you have multiple. So you don't need to worry about drawing U0 or U2 when you're constructing consumer equilibrium. You only have to make sure you have a utility curve, U1, or indifference curve, U1, and your original budget line, and the point in which your two curves intercept, they are tangent to each other. At that point, you are in consumer equilibrium. Okay. There we go. Oh, my arrows is off. Okay, mathematically, you don't need to worry about the budget line, the slope, because they don't assess that at all. We just need you to understand that we derive it. Sorry, a lot of curves. Okay, so the last section, we're then looking at, okay, what then happens if our income increases? Okay, so originally we had a budget of 24. What happens if our budget increases? We suddenly have more money for whatever reason. Now, logically, more is always preferred to less. So as consumers, if we have more money, we will essentially spend more. Remember, economics, we don't assume at all that savings is part of the equation. Because remember, what does savings mean in economics? It means you are removing money out of the system. We need you to spend. I know it's counterintuitive, but we need you to spend money to create money, essentially. Okay, to turn the economy, we need consumers to spend. So we make the assumption that if you have more money, you will spend more. So what happens if your budget now increases? It originally was 24, and now it's higher. So our original curves, we're drawing our utility curve, multiple utility curves. Okay. Our intercept points, there's our budget line. So at a point where the two are tangent, you are in consumer equilibrium. Great, but that was on the 24 Rand as your budget. Okay. So now what happens if your budget becomes 48 Rand? So your budget has essentially doubled. The prices of the product haven't changed, which means now to get your new intercept points, you're then going to say 48 divided by 4 in terms of bread, and then 48 divided by 6 in terms of meat to get your new intercept points. So there you have it now. Okay, so 48 divided by 4, get 12, and then 48 divided by 6, and you get 8. And you have a new budget line as well as a new utility curve. So you have a new point of equilibrium. So we can then say, logically, the more you have in terms of your income, your consumption of goods will then increase. So if your income increases, your budget line will shift parallel to the right. Should your income then decrease, your budget line will shift parallel to the left. Okay. The other concept is, just in case they do ask it in the exam, because they can get a little sneaky about it, we also make the assumption that if your budget increases, you'll consume more of the products, therefore it's a normal product. A normal product to us is always, should my income increase, do I demand more of that product? The answer is yes, it's a normal good. If the answer is no, then it's an inferior good to us. Okay. So just then once you connect the two equilibrium points with a straight line, the way this yellow line is structured. So you connect the two equilibrium points, we will essentially be in what we call consumer equilibrium, and we will then ascertain and we will get your income consumption curve based on the consumption of the two products. And should my income increase, this is my income consumption curve. Okay, so again, just to remind you, you only have to draw utility curve U0 because that intercepts with your first budget line, and then utility curve 3 in this case, or you can label it 1, 2, it's up to you. Utility curve 3 then, because that intercepts with your second budget line. Okay. You don't need to draw the multiple. We all know we have multiple utility curves. Okay, a decrease in our income. So now if our budget goes to 12 Rand, was 24 Rand, it's now 12 Rand. We will essentially do the exact same thing, get our new budget line with our utility curve. Okay, make sure we're labeling our curves, connect our two equilibrium points, and then we will still have our income consumption curve. Okay. Now, what then happens if the price, and that's also what happens in stores. You originally had a budget, you had a grocery list of things you wanted to purchase, but when you got to the store, the price changed. It increased. Okay, so in this example, the price of meat has increased. So if the price of the product increases, but your budget doesn't increase, your budget stays fixed. Okay, then we are saying we will then be able to consume less of the product. Okay, we're not going to, we can't substitute it out, we'll just consume less. So if the price of meat was originally 6 Rand, it's now 12 Rand, it's almost doubled in price. We will then say 24 divided by 12 to give our new intercept point for our budget line being 2. So essentially, our budget line will swivel inward, meaning the more expensive a product becomes, the less you are able to demand because you have a budget. Okay, so it will swivel inwards. The less the product costs you, logically, the more you'll be able to consume. The more expensive it becomes, the less you'll be able to consume. Okay. And then you have your new equilibrium point or consumer equilibrium point at a point where your utility curve and your budget line intercept with each other. Connect the two points, and then you will now have your price consumption, because remember the changing variable here is the price. Before it was the income. And remember, when your budget changes, your entire consumption of both goods change. But if the price of the product changes, it's only going to affect the consumption of the one product where the price changed. Okay. So again, now if there's a decrease in the price of meat, remember, if it becomes cheaper, we will then be able to consume more. So our budget line will swivel outward. Okay. So in understanding, it was your budget is still 24 Rand divided by, if the price changes now from 6 Rand to 3 Rand, your budget line will essentially swivel outward. Your equilibrium point at the point where your utility curve is tangent to your budget line, connect the two points, and then you'll essentially get your income consumption curve. Okay. And then obviously the opposite is also the effect. So seldomly will you find that both goods will change, because then the curves are going to shift parallelly. So it's usually only one product. The price of one product will either increase or decrease depending on the question. Okay. So if we have the opposite case where there's an increase in the price of bread now. Okay. So it was originally 4 Rand, it's now 8 Rand. Then we can then ultimately consume less of the product. So our curve will swivel inward. Okay. New budget line. Please make sure there's labels. Very strict on the labels this time. With your utility curve, new consumer equilibrium point, connect your 2 points and you'll have your price consumption curve. Okay. If it's a straight, as long as the line is straight, regardless of what angle it's at, we will give it to you. Okay. And then same if the price of bread decreases. So essentially the price of bread got cheaper. So therefore you can consume more. Get your new intercept points for your budget line. So now it was 4 Rand. It's now 2 Rand. So 24 divided by 2 gives us a new intercept of 12. Price of meat has not changed. We have our new utility curve, new equilibrium or consumer equilibrium point. Connect the 2 points and we will get your price consumption curve. Okay. So just a reminder, changes of income. If your income increases, parallel shift to the right. Income decreases, parallel shift to the left. Versus if there's an increase in the price, depending on which product it is, you will have a swivel inward. Okay. So yeah, either or, whichever price of the product has increased, whether it's the price of bread or the price of meat, your curve swivels will always swivel inward. When something becomes more expensive, you are able then to consume less. Okay. And a decrease in the price, you are able to now consume more because it's cheaper, because your budget hasn't changed. And then your curve always swivels to the right or swivels upwards, depending on which product it is. So they will tell you which product it is. Okay. Then we are essentially saying, great, knowing what we know now, how do we then derive a demand curve? And essentially a demand curve, normal demand curve, is based on the price and the quantity demanded. Do we have the price of the product and do we have the quantity demanded of the product? And the answer is yes, we do. They gave the price of the product to us. So it's usually the price of the product that is changing. Okay. So in this case, it will be your meat, right? It was 6 Rand and it's now 12 Rand. So we know the price of the product. So if you had to derive a normal demand curve, price of meat, quantity of meat, okay? There's 6 Rand. Well away. Okay, there. The original price was 6 Rand. There, it's now 12 Rand. So at 6, how many units are you consuming? In this case, you're consuming 2 units of the product. Okay, versus if it's at 12 Rand, you are then consuming 1 unit of the product. There we are. Draw your demand curve, and that's your demand curve for meat. Okay, so it's very simple, it's plain and simple. Usually, they don't ask, we from the institution, don't ask the students, how do you derive the demand curve from this? Because it's very higher order thinking here. And the idea behind it is we need you to understand the concept of the indifference curve and the utility approach, as well as your budget line. So your consumer equilibrium, we're more focused on that than we are how do you derive a demand curve, because we know that if we ask you to derive a demand curve, you're automatically going to go back to learning unit 4. We know this. Okay, so they tend not to ask the students, how do you derive the demand curve? Because the wording of the question has to be so specific so that you know you have to be in learning unit 6 and not in learning unit 4. Okay. And that is the class. I'm not too sure if anybody has any questions in terms of the assignment, because I know your assignment is due next week. Just